Let's stop pretending that this is random. Let's stop pretending that the assault on democracy is some accidental drift, some unfortunate court case, or one isolated redistricting fight in one state after another. It's choreography, deliberate, patient, and ruthless. For decades, the right wing has understood a simple truth. If you can't always win the vote outright, you change who gets to vote, where they vote, how they vote, and how much their vote actually counts. If the majority of people don't support your position, you change the game to govern by minority rule. That's the project. That's the method. And the Supreme Court's April 29, 2026 ruling in Louisiana versus Calais did not just continue that work, it deepened it by weakening the Voting Rights Act's ability to protect against racial vote dilution. The old law was meant to stop the Southern toolkit, violence, poll taxes, literacy tests, grandfather clauses, from keeping black voters out of power. For a long time it worked, but one ruling after another has chipped away at it. Pre-clearance gutted, vote denial claims weakened, and now Section 2 narrowed so much that lawmakers can draw maps that do the damage while insisting they meant only to target party, not race. That's the trick. If intent is the test, sophisticated politicians can always say partisan while doing race by another name. We are no longer in the era of blunt, open racism. The days of colored signs, poll taxes, and officials proudly saying the quiet part out loud are gone. Today's discrimination is dressed up in legal language, coded as neutral, and designed so carefully that no one will ever stand up and say, this bill is meant to stop black people and Latinos from voting. That's exactly why intent is so hard to prove. The people drawing these maps and writing these laws know how to use polished, facially innocent words to disguise the same old result. And this is where the right's long game matters. They were serious about the Supreme Court when too many people on the left were playing games. The right built the Federalist Society, built the judicial pipeline, and treated the courts like the main prize. When Donald Trump came along in 2016, he was not many Republicans' first choice, second choice, or even close. But guess what? They fell in line, young and old, because they understood the real deal. He would give them the justices they wanted, and he did. In his first term, Trump appointed 3 Supreme Court justices: Neil Gorsuch, who currently sits in the seat that was stolen by Mitch McConnell from President Barack Obama, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett, and 234 federal judges across Article III courts. Amy Coney Barrett was rammed through in 2020, an election year, after Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg died that same year, even though Mitch McConnell had built an entire doctrine around you cannot replace a Supreme Court justice in an election year, when he blocked President Obama's nominee Merrick Garland in 2016. In other words, the right did not merely accept Trump, they used him to finish a judicial takeover that they had spent decades in the making. That's why people who said, I don't want to vote for the lesser of two evils in 2016 now have to sit with what followed. The refusal to back Hillary Clinton helped clear the path for a presidency that delivered not just policy, but lifetime right-wing judicial power. That's why those who thought it was righteous to vote uncommitted in Dearborn, Michigan in 2024, because they did not align 100% with the Biden-Harris position on Gaza, now have an administration complicit in turning Gaza into rubble and then treating the rebuild like a real estate project. And now that same administration has put in place federal judges who will set us back to the era before the civil rights movement. These Trump-appointed, Republican-approved federal judges with lifetime appointments will be shaping the law for decades to come. The cost of that decision was not symbolic, it was structural. It was a stolen Supreme Court seat from President Barack Obama, 4 years later converted into a permanent conservative majority that the court has used to gut abortion rights, weaken voting rights, eviscerate environmental protection, give the executive branch unchecked power, and protect the very machinery now being used to narrow democracy. That is why the Louisiana ruling cannot be treated as something a blue wave in November will simply wash away. It has already set the country back for decades. Even if Democrats win both chambers of Congress, it remains an uphill battle because the Supreme Court has shifted the burden onto plaintiffs, made intent the decisive hurdle, and given states more room to do exactly what they claim they're not doing. Once those maps are drawn, votes are cast, primaries are underway, and courts are asked to unwind a structure that has already done its work, the damage is not easily reversed. And that is why Democrats can no longer treat court reform as some fringe left-wing fantasy. If Republicans had only 3 justices on the Supreme Court bench and the other side had engineered a court this skewed, there's no universe in which the right wing would sit still and just accept this as reality. Every right-wing podcaster in America would be screaming for court expansion, judicial impeachment, emergency reform, and whatever else could be done to rescue the court from those radical liberals. The left should stop acting like court reform is taboo. If the court is being used as a weapon, then the answer is not reverence to a playbook that was abandoned in 2016. The answer is repair. That means the next Congress must do more than complain. It must prioritize a stronger John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act that restores the force of Section 5 preclearance and strengthens Section 2 so that states cannot keep laundering discrimination through the word partisan and presuming that the next president is a Democrat. That Democratic president cannot play games with power. We need a real majority, not a ceremonial one, not a razor-thin one that depends on a vice president's tie-breaking vote. We need a real majority with enough votes to break the filibuster, enough votes to codify voting rights, enough votes to confront the court, and yes, enough votes to seriously consider court expansion if that is what it takes to save the republic from further damage. And the consequences are already visible. In North Carolina, Republicans passed a map that pushed the state toward an 11-3 GOP advantage and targeted Representative Don Davis's 1st congressional district, a district rooted in eastern North Carolina's historic black congressional power. In the state of Texas, black and Latino representation was hit hard, with several districts redrawn to weaken members of color and reduce the number of seats where blacks and Latino voters can elect candidates of their choice. In Missouri, Representative Emanuel Kleber's district has been in the crosshairs. In Alabama, Terry Sewell's Black Belt seat is under attack, and Republicans are pushing toward a 10-0 map. In Tennessee, the Memphis-based Democratic district, the state's lone Democratic seat, and a majority black district is openly being targeted right now. This is not theoretical. It's a demolition plan. Texas Democrats in 2025 fled the state to block the GOP's mid-decade redistricting assault, and they did send a message. But when they returned roughly after just 2 weeks, the message lost force because the machine they were trying to stop was still running. The walkout mattered symbolically, but Republicans kept moving because the real battle is in the state legislatures, the legal filings, and the speed with which power can be exercised once the guardrails come off. Virginia shows the counterexample. Voters there approved a redistricting amendment that lets Democrats redraw the congressional map, and the new configuration is projected to give Democrats as many as 4 additional House seats. That is what resistance looks like when it's serious. Not just how many people turn out to No King's protests, but structure. Not just outrage. Not just cute signs, but power meeting power. California's Proposition 50 is the same kind of answer. California did not merely complain about rigging, it used redistricting as a counterweight to the GOP's national map warfare. Florida is the clearest example of what happens next. Governor Ron DeSantis, in response, pushed an aggressive redraw that can eliminate 4 of the state's 8 Democratic districts. And because the court just weakened the Voting Rights Act's protections with Section 2, Republican lawmakers now have a stronger shield to claim that maps are partisan rather than racial. In other words, the court handed the states a new excuse, just as the states were looking for one. That's why this Louisiana ruling is so dangerous. Once the guardrails come off, the map becomes the weapon. If you could redraw the map, you do not need to persuade the majority. You only need to contain it. If you could weaken the Voting Rights Act, you could make the harm harder to prove. If you can control state legislatures, you can control the rules before the people ever get a fair shot. And this is not just about Congress. It reaches down to state legislatures, county commissions, city councils, and the entire pipeline that produces black elected leadership and Latino elected leadership. If these lines stand, black and Latino political power can be diluted from the top of the ticket all the way down to the local level. Representation is not symbolism, it's power. This is not about voter fraud. It's about voter control. If you can redraw maps, weaken the law, and make discrimination harder to prove, then you do not need to silence every voice. You only need to manage enough of them to preserve power. That's the project. Everything else is camouflage. And that's why the 2026 midterm elections matter with a gravity we have not seen since the 1866 election. The moment after the Civil War when the country decided whether black citizenship would be real or merely rhetorical. We cannot afford to play purity tests when so much is at stake. We cannot waste time with simple and intellectually dishonest, both sides are the same rhetoric. One side wants to advance civil rights and one side wants to eliminate them. That is the reality. This year is not just another midterm. It's a test of whether the republic will keep moving toward an inclusive, multiracial democracy or keep retreating into a managed, manipulated order where power is concentrated before the first ballot is cast. Whatever issue moves you most, voting rights, the economy, Gaza, reproductive freedom, immigration, education, the courts, healthcare, none of it matters if you do not have the numbers to win, and numbers only come from turnout. So this is the moment to show up like the whole future depends on it, because in a very real sense, it does.